Okay. Well, as I said, Daniel chapter 8 is, I didn't say this, I'm going to say this, is starts a new, it's a new section, I would say, of Daniel. Right? And I, on the past handout that I got, when I was getting ready to write the introduction, and I was reading one of the study guides that we've really leaned on, Wolverd's, I said, his introduction's so good, why don't I just loosely paraphrase what he has and give him credit for it and use that. And so two important factors that mark Daniel chapter 8 as the beginning of a new section. First, the beginning of this chapter, the language returns to Hebrew. So chapter 1 was Hebrew, and then it went to Aramaic, and now it's back to Hebrew. And the second change of the language is in keeping with the change in thought introduced by this chapter. From here to the end of Daniel, the prophecy, even though it concerns Gentiles, is occupied with human history as it relates to Israel. Therefore, although many expositors look at this book of Daniel in two halves, which are chapter 1 through 6, and then chapter 7 through 12, his thinking is there's good reason for dividing into three sections. One, which is just the introduction of Daniel, as you'll recall, and his compatriots after they got exiled into Babylon and went into service to the king. And they displayed the kind of character they had, that they were going to live like good Jewish boys and not become Babylonians themselves, if you will. And then he started becoming, in chapters 2 through 7, he started becoming very important to the various rulers and really established himself, Daniel, as an important leader amongst the servants of the king. And then chapter 8, that brings us to chapter 8 through 12. Again, we start taking a look at Israel and their relationships moving forward. The first of Daniel's own visions, chapter 7, dealt with the times of the Gentiles, culminating with the return of Christ. So that's what we looked at last week, right? Chapter 8 deals with Daniel's second vision and concerns the empires of Persia and Greece, and as they relate to Israel. Now, interestingly, under Persia government, the Israelites were favored, and they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem, as we all know, and reconstitute their temple, rebuild the city. But under the Greeks, specifically under Antiochus Epiphanes, the city and temple were again desolated, right? And we'll be reading about that quite a bit today. With that said, let me get over to chapter 8. And I'm going to start by reading verses 1 and 2. In the third year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. In my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa, in the province of Elam. In the vision, I was beside the Ulal Canal. So as we take a look at that vision, I want to note that last in chapter 7, it was a dream. And here he says it's a vision, which tells me he wasn't asleep. All of a sudden, God is speaking to him, right? And then it goes on to say, he's having a vision, and I have a question for you. Is he in Susa, or is his vision taking him, or is he having a vision about Susa? About, yeah. Any other disagreements? I don't know that it's that important, but I don't think he'd actually be in Susa, because later on, Susa became the capital of Persia, the Persian Empire, right? But to start with, they went and conquered Babylon to get control, right? And this was before they did. I mean, Belshazzar is still, he was a Babylonian, he wasn't a Persian. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out is the timeline of this writing. We can remember in chapter 5, the writing on the wall, remember? And right after that occurred, the Babylonians were overthrown by the Persians. And then we go back in time. In chapters 7 and 8, Belshazzar is back to being king, so we revert. So the point I wanted to make, the Persians weren't in charge yet, right? So he's having a vision of a town called Susa, which if you took a look at the map, and the Persian Gulf. And the very western end, Sus is about 150 miles north of the very tip, the western tip of that Gulf. And it became a very important city in time, although at that specific point in time, it was not. Moving on to verses 3 and 4. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as he charged towards the west and the north and the south. No animal could stand against him, and none could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. Now, who are we talking about here? Ram with 2 horns. The Persians, Media Persia, what were later called the Achaemenid Empire. But I refer to them just as the Persian Empire throughout this study today. Yeah, we can read that. We can make it really easy. We can just go to verse 20 real quick. And it says, the 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media Persia. One horn's longer than the other. What does that represent? One's more powerful? Ed?
Yeah, so the one came up longer later.
Yeah.
That would be in Persia because it was more recent.
It was the stronger, yeah, it was the stronger.
But it was also younger. It came to power more recently.
I think it's really important to point out that we're talking about one kingdom here. We're not talking 2 kingdoms. And I believe, Tim, you pointed out that some of the liberal scholars were taking a look at the dream that Daniel had in chapter 7 and was saying that of the 4 kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians were 2 different kingdoms, and Rome was not included in that vision, right? And they did that because they didn't believe in predictive prophecy. They didn't believe a prophet, a man, could look to the future, even with God's guidance, and be able to predict the future that accurately. So they came up with this big hypothesis that Daniel was actually written after all of the stuff we're going to study today, after the Greek conquest. So it was just a forgery. Daniel was writing it like it was a prophecy, but it was just history, right? And the thought of including Rome last week as that last final king of the 4th kingdom, Rome didn't come to power until later on, so it blew that out of the water, right? So they came up with that, well, the Medes and the Persians were 2 different empires, but they weren't. The other thing I'd say about the validity of Daniel is Jesus quoted Daniel. And to me, that's open and shut case right there. Jesus quoted Daniel. That gives Daniel credibility. The second thing is they found Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So guess what? They blow those liberal scholars right out of the water. So it said in verse 4, the ram charged west, north, and south. Now, what does that represent? Why didn't he go east? Well, yeah, relatively speaking. But the answer is kind of a combination between the two, is that's where they conquered. They already had their kingdom, apparently the Persians, all the way to the Indus River, which is basically the border of India. And their conquering was to the west. They conquered Babylon. And before that, Babylon had conquered Assyria. And so they had a lot of control. And then they conquered all the way up through Asia Minor, right? All the way up to the Hellespont. And then they conquered all the way down into Egypt. And they controlled all of the Middle East, including Israel and Arabia. So those were the directions that they went conquering, right? And the image is this ram that nobody could stand up to. That was just incredible. They also attempted to conquer Greece. Remember that in our history, right? On 2 separate occasions, they tried to conquer Greece. The first time, they were defeated at the Battle of Marathon. Now, what was that famous for? The marathon, yeah. The guy ran to alert the Athenians that we're under attack. Bring all the rest of the troops down here and help us at Marathon. And it was 26 miles between Marathon and Athens. And the Persians came with a mighty army, much bigger than the Greeks, but the Greeks beat them, right? And then 10 years later, they said, we got to do this again. So in 480 BC, they attacked, and this time, instead of having all of a sea force coming across, they went up across the Hellespont, up north, and they were going to come down on Greece from the north. And the first battle was at Thermopylae. I don't know if we remember this, but that's where he had 300 Spartans holding off the entire Persian army for days upon days. Now, they finally lost, but the Persians lost again. First, they lost a sea battle that was fought at a place called Salamis, and then they followed up by another loss in the Battle of Plataea. So the one thing we know for sure is they left a really bad taste in the mouth of the Greeks by invading them twice. And they probably, in retrospect, regretted they ever did such a thing. But moving on then, looking at verse 5. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. Well, now who's that? It's Greece. Greece is the goat. Who's the horn? Alexander the Great is the horn. They're representing that power, right? And it said he came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. Now, what in the world could he possibly mean by that?
It was so swift.
Fast, swift. Do you remember last week when they were describing the kingdom? How did they describe him as an animal last week? With wings, a leopard with wings. That sounds like a fierce animal, and they were fierce. And he moved fast, he had wings, he moved so fast. And that's what he did, Alexander. I mean, and he came across, and understand this, Persia's army was much bigger than Greece's army. And Greece left their home, and they came, their supply lines were horrible, and so they were tremendously disadvantaged. But obviously they had some incredible advantages. But with 3 decisive battles, they won this overall war with Persia. First was the Battle of Grecius River, fought in May of 334. And this was northern Asia Minor, just really close to the very northern portion of the Persian Empire, up by the Dardanelles. That's the seaway that divides Europe and Asia Minor. And the Greeks won that battle. And that was followed 1 year later, the Battle of Issus, which was fought in November of 333. And that was on the border of Asia Minor and Syria. So he had come clear through modern-day Turkey, and the Persians met them there and lost. And then they had one final battle called the Battle of Gaugamela in October of 331, and that's in modern-day northern Iraq, really close to the ancient city of Nineveh. And again, the Greeks won that, and that was it. They had defeated the Persians. And in between that time, interestingly, between those last 2 battles, Alexander the Great had the time, or he took the time to go and conquer other possessions of Persia. The first one was the city of Tyre. And that was no small accomplishment, because I don't know if you know what the city of Tyre was like, but it was a city out on an island out in the Mediterranean Sea. To be able to defeat that was quite an accomplishment. And then they went down and defeated Gaza, and then they went over and defeated Egypt, and then he came up to Jerusalem. And that was very interesting. Paul. Same Gaza we're hearing about today. Yep. The same Philistines that people like to consider themselves the descendants of and call themselves Palestinians. I've got my doubts. Anyway, so then he came back to Jerusalem after all that. And this is really interesting. The Jews, Alexander had already asked the Jews, send me troops when he was fighting Tyre. Send me troops. And they said, we're not going to send you troops. We're allied, we're going to be loyal to Persia. And the Samaritans sent him troops. And so Alexander the Great came back, and he was going to let the Jews have it. And the high priest had a dream. And in the dream, God told the high priest, open your gates wide, march out in your regalia, your priestly robes, and meet him on the way, and take officials with you. And so he did. And it really caught Alexander's attention, because before he started his conquest, he had actually had a dream of the high priest. He didn't know it was the high priest. He didn't know what, but he recognized the clothing, and he recognized the whole situation. And so he was very open. And then what did the high priest do? Well, he opened up his Bible to Daniel chapter 8 and said, right here, this is you. And this comes from, by the way, I didn't mention this, it comes from Josephus. Josephus wrote this. This is how we know this. So Alexander said, okay, well, you guys are good. We're good. Yeah, we're going to march on and finish off the Persians, Paul. Illustrates the importance of Bible study. Knowing the Word. Timely. Yeah. All right, let's move on. So I'm going to go to verse 6 and 7. He came toward the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged him in a great rage. I saw him attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering his two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against him, and the goat knocked him to the ground and trampled on him, and none could rescue the ram from his power. And so that's what all those battles that we were just reading about was prophetically described here. It was going to happen. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't stand up against this leopard with wings, even though they had a mighty army. And they fell. And I was just going to mention that, the Persian Empire and their strength, they'd been around a little over 200 years by the time this battle had occurred. So they had really had an opportunity to consolidate their strength. And before this, nobody could stand. Nobody could stand against them. So let's see here. With this conquest, Alexander really started a whole new epoch in history. A whole new epoch. I mean, the Greeks weren't anything like the Persians. Entirely different. And they came over, and what was one of the big things they did? The Greek language and culture. They call it Hellenization. Right? They spread it everywhere. And they got a common tongue. And I think I've got this pronunciation right. Koine Greek. Is that Koine, right? Koine Greek, I mean, there was different dialects of Greek, apparently, but this is the common tongue. This is what everyone's going to speak. And so you ask yourself, why is the Bible, the New Testament, written in Greek? Right here. Right here. And they spoke Greek from Greece all the way through Asia Minor, the Middle East, down into Egypt. When they wrote the Septuagint, why did they write the Septuagint? Because you had Greek-speaking Jews. They didn't speak Hebrew anymore down in Alexandria, so they wrote the Septuagint. All right, moving along. I'm going to read, let's see, did I read 6, 7? The goat, which was became very great. Greece became very great. But at the height of its power, his large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up towards the 4 winds of heaven. So Alexander the Great died. He finished his conquest, let's see, in 223. No, he died in 223, about 7 years after he finished his conquest. Yeah, it probably is 323, and I have a big typo going, Tim. Thank you. Only 32 years of age. Young guy. Accomplished a lot in 32 years. And so, who are the 4 horns? 4 generals. Yep, Cassander, Macedonia and Greece. So they divvied up the kingdom. All right? So Cassandra, Macedonia and Greece, Lysimachus, Thrace, Bithynia and Asia Minor, Seleucus, Syria and Babylon, and Ptolemy, Egypt, Israel, and Arabia. Let's move on to verse 9. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small, but grew in power to the south and started to the east towards the beautiful land. Now, who are we talking about here? Antiochus Epiphanes. He became the leader of the Seleucid Empire, and he took power, and he attacked Ptolemy. He wanted Ptolemy's power too, and so he went down and attacked Egypt. And he didn't conquer Egypt, he defeated Egypt, but Egypt was also at that time allied with Rome. And he didn't want anything to do with messing with Rome just yet, so he started looking at the beautiful land. Now, what do you suppose the beautiful land was? Israel. He says, I'll go up here. These guys aren't like in tight with the Romans. I'll go see what trouble we can cause up here. And so in verse 10, it says, it grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled them. Now, who is the starry host? It's the people of Israel. It's not literally the starry host, it's the people of Israel. He attacked Israel, and we know that he actually, he didn't destroy Jerusalem, but he sacked the city on two separate occasions. He came in. And he really was looking to replace and eliminate the Jewish religion. And I'm going to read that in verses 11 and 12. It set itself up to be as great as the prince of the host. He tried to be God. He set himself up to be God. It took away the daily sacrifices. You had two sacrifices, a morning and an evening sacrifice every day, and he took those away. That's what they did. That's their propitiation for their sins. That's how they lived. That was their religion. And he just came in and took it away. And the place of the sanctuary was brought low. Because of the rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifices were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, meaning Antiochus, and truth was thrown to the ground. Yeah.
Mine says it will fling truth to the ground. And that's what we're dealing with all through history and today even too.
Yeah.
That's why the PBS was we hammered it home. Truth.
What is truth? Truth never changes. Well, you know, I heard a very good quote this week, and I don't know how I could fit it in the Bible study, but I think I finally just got an opportunity to. Thank you, Ed. I'd rather have a question I can't answer than an answer I can't question. Right? Right? Now, I think it may have some application here. Maybe you guys can help me out and see the application. But in any event, so this is what all he did. He made efforts to replace the Jewish religion with the Greek religion, worshiping Zeus. I've read he even erected a statue of Zeus in the temple. He replaced the high priest with a man of his own choosing. Yeah, I don't like you, you're out. Here's my high priest. He's the new guy. As we said, he ended the morning and evening sacrifice. He sacrificed a pig in the temple. Made the Jewish officials eat pork. And these events, what did they lead to? The Maccabean revolt. Judas Maccabeus revolt in 168. And in 165 BC, Judas Maccabeus recaptured Jerusalem and restored the temple worship. And Hanukkah basically celebrates this victory. Now, one thing I haven't done, I need to do, is read the Maccabees. Now, it's not considered scripture, but I think it's considered very good history. I have not read that, but I think it'd be very enlightening. Anyway, moving along, because I better. Verses 13 and 14. Then I heard a holy one speaking to another holy one and said to him, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary, and the host that will be trampled underfoot. So what's he asking? How long is all this going to last? How long is it going to last? Let's read verse 14. He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be consecrated. So 2,300 mornings and evenings. Now, does that mean 2,300 days? Say, Jude, 2,300 days, okay. All right, I think this is a really good opportunity to take a look at how we apply rules to Bible study, this right here. The first thing to do is consider the context. What have we been talking about this whole chapter? Yeah, we've been talking specifically in prophecy, Persia and Greece. Persia and Greece. Would there be any reason to take a look and say, well, this is the time of the great the time of tribulation and Christ's return? Nothing we've read here would suggest that, but it'd be very easy to pop in from nowhere and just read that passage and come away with that conclusion. Or listen to somebody preaching somewhere and they're going back and forth and maybe they're in Revelations and they drop in right here. They don't read the rest of it. They just read this and you think, oh yeah, that fits right along with the end times, doesn't it? That's why that's one of the great things I think about our style of teaching, which is verse by verse. First, it makes you get into things you may not want to talk about. Oops, I really would rather not talk about that, but God thought it was important enough to put in the Bible, so we're going to talk about it. And secondly, it gives you this context. Right now, who would think it was 2,300 years? Well, somebody thought it was 2,300 years. That was the Seventh-day Adventists thought so. And they believed that 2,300 days were indeed years. Hence, they predicted Christ's return in 1884. They were wrong. Yeah, they were wrong. The second rule I think we look at here is you understand Scripture to be literal unless there's a very good reason not to take it literally. So if they're saying 2,300 days, unless there's a really good reason not to take it as 2,300 days, take it as 2,300 days, right? Now, we had a great example earlier of symbolism when we talked about, he moved across the whole earth and the seas without touching the ground. Well, we now know that that's symbolistic, and we've got to dig deeper to get to the meaning of that. But this one here, it seems pretty straightforward. And then, for example, Ryrie exposits that the 2,300 days were literal days of Antiochus' persecution of the Jews from 171 BC, when peaceful relationships were ended, until December 25th, 165 BC, when Judas Maccabeus restored the temple worship and sacrifices.
And also because it says evenings and mornings.
Evenings and mornings.
To make it not a day.
Interestingly, Tim, please.
Yeah, I don't have the Hebrew text in front of me, but that seems to allude back to Genesis chapter 1, where a day is clearly defined as evening and morning.
Very good point. Very good point. And if you didn't hear that, in Genesis chapter 1 in the Hebrew, a day is very clearly defined as a day. Evening and morning. Interestingly, I was reading in the, I'm teaching out of an NIV study Bible, and the way they looked at it, there were only 2 daily sacrifices with continual burnt offering, representing the atonement required for Israel as a whole. The 2,300 evenings and mornings probably refer to the number of sacrifices. So they're making the point that it wasn't 2,300 days, it was 2,300 sacrifices, which would have been 1,150 days. Now, I personally will go with Ryrie, but I don't know. But the point I really wanted to make is you take things literally unless there's a darn good reason not to. Like Jesus looked at one of the Pharisees and says, "You fox." Well, he wasn't a fox. We know that's not what he meant. So you don't take that literally. That'd be an example. Let's move on then. to verse 15. While I, Daniel, was waiting, watching the visions and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I move 16. And I heard a man's voice from Ulai calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. Now, who's Gabriel? He was an angel, right? And where else do we, little pop quiz, where else do we read about Gabriel specifically in the Bible? Virgin Mary, Luke 1:26. And Zacharias, John's father. You remember Luke 1:16. So we read about him there. This is the first time we read about him in the Bible, right? And we never read about Michael until here in a couple chapters. We'll read about Michael. So the question I have, real quickly, again another quiz: how many angels have been named in the Bible? There's 2. Somebody says 3. Lucifer, right? Clarence. Okay. As I stood near the place where I was standing, as he came near the place I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Son of man, he said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. Well, again, what time of the end of what? We're not talking about the end times. We're talking about the end of Antiochus Epiphanes' power. He's going to be broken. While I was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. And then he touched me and I raised me to my feet. And he said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath. Now, I'm going to read from 19 here until 22. And again, I'll say again, if we didn't have the context, we would think we're reading about end times theology right now. But we're not. He said, I'm going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The 2-horned ram you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia, and the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. And the 4 horns that replace the one that was broken off represents the 4 kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. No, they certainly didn't. In the latter part of their reigns, when rebels have become completely wicked, a stern-faced king, Antiochus Epiphanes, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong. Sounds just like the Antichrist, doesn't he? And it's kind of a forerunner of the Antichrist. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. Well, whose power is he going to become strong by? Ed says Satan. Well, it's not his own power, so it could be manly power. It was because of the power that Alexander the Great established. But I believe it's probably Satan. But at the same time, it could be God. God used Assyria. God used Babylon for his means. And in both times, he used them to discipline nation Israel, northern and southern kingdoms. I don't know what was really going on at this point in time. I don't know if God saw fit that Israel needed to be disciplined, but we know that he didn't immediately protect them. But I don't know. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the mighty man and the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince of princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. It definitely is a forerunner of the Antichrist, isn't he? A model. So he's going to be destroyed, but not by human power. And we know, history tells us that he actually died. He fell ill and died. He wasn't assassinated. The armies didn't kill him. He fell ill and died. Moving on to verse 26. This vision of the evening and the morning that has been given you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. Not way distant, but distant, a couple hundred years away. I, Daniel, was exhausted and lay ill for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business, and I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding.
You said there, they keep the vision secret, but pertains to many days in the future. I always understood that as he told him more information at that time that said, don't tell anybody yet. And so he was, and I don't know that this is true, but, and then Daniel was exhausted in 60 days because astounded at the vision, and there's no one to explain it. Well, he just had this vision explained, the earlier vision explained as to what the history would be. And so I always wondered if did he get a glimpse at what Revelation then did expound a little more. And I don't know which.
So Ed's point was, I don't know if I ever heard him, but that it could be that he received more revelation from God, and that's what specifically he didn't want them to relate. I think, I don't know, but I think part of the whole changing back to writing in Hebrew is this isn't something you're going to go back and tell the king of Babylon. You're not going to be telling the Babylonians, you're going to lose here pretty quick. It won't be too long and you're going to get beat. Yeah, the Babylonians, they're done. The Persians are going to take them out. But even the Persians aren't that strong because the Greeks are going to come.
Secret, he's just not giving it to him.
I'm just thinking. I don't know that. I don't know that.
I think it's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
He was so exhausted he died.
He was so exhausted he died. Yeah. He fell ill. We know that much. Yeah. Being a prophet wasn't a good job, really, was it? I think back to like Hosea. You know, that wasn't such a hot job. You know, Tim.
The interpretation that's offered in the earlier verses there should lay to rest the argument that the more liberal interpreters have about Media and Persia being two separate kingdoms of the four. Okay? This makes it absolutely clear, Media and Persia. And I think you made that point in the notes too.
Yeah, Tim is reiterating that, you know, Media and Persia were one empire, not two. And it kind of puts to rest liberals' claims that Daniel was truly an inspired prophet, inspired by God. It was put to rest that it was a forgery.
And the elephant in the room that we all need to really recognize is the fact that he made this astoundingly accurate prediction of what history was. Amazing things about history that never have occurred since, not even close, and right down to the details.
Yes.
And so to deny that he did that is that's always been a struggle for people, because how could someone do that? And really he did it. And so that's what one of the things that we can hang our faith hat on is that how else could that have happened without God's intervention in his life directly to inform the people of his time and us today? And I mean, that's enormous. Think about
Yep.
how powerful that is.
Ed's just making the case for how powerful fulfilled prophecy is to our evangelizing efforts. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And the thing that kind of boggles my mind, you hear liberal critics. You know, if you're totally unbelievers, I don't believe any of this stuff. I don't believe in God. I don't believe that. You want to lodge that criticism? Well, yeah, you're wrong. We can show you you're wrong logically, but I can kind of understand if you don't believe that, you know, you'd hear about this. Of course, I don't believe in predictive history. But if you're a believer or you claim to be a believer and you don't believe Jesus, you know, you read the Bible, you don't believe the Bible at all. Apparently, you'd have to not kind of believe the Bible at all. I'm thinking, gosh, what do you have faith in then? Yeah. I'm kind of simplistic, black and white that way. Paul?
Many times in
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any final thought before we wrap it up, Tim?
This is going a little bit beyond, but the influence of Alexander the Great, who carried Greek culture with him as he invaded all that part of the world, and then specifically Antiochus Epiphanes and everything that he did there in Israel and Jerusalem specifically. That influence of Greek culture was still a powerful force at the time of Jesus.
Yes.
So that when you look at like the Pharisees and Sadducees, in a way the Sadducees represented, they were the ones who were much more accommodating to the Greek culture. And we try, I think we think of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus as very homogenous, that everybody was either like a Pharisee or something like that, you know. And that Chosen series, I think, has done a good job of bringing out that there were a lot of different parties and factions, and one of them was that very strong Greek influence.
So Tim's point, if you didn't hear it all, is we'll recap it, was just the far-reaching impact of Alexander the Great that was continuing to have influence at the time of Jesus. Now we read in Acts 2, remember you had the Grecian Jews and the Hebrew Jews complaining and getting mad at each other because our widows aren't being taken care of like your widows. So that would support that. But hey, thank you for your time and attention, guys. Let's pray. Father, we just come before you thanking you, Lord. Thank you for the learning in chapter 8. And I think about the application is just faith in you. You're the God that has shown us this fulfilled prophecy. And you're not done working in this manner. As a matter of fact, we know you're working in our lives in this way, Lord. And you've promised us that you're going to conform us to your image. He who began a good work is going to be faithful and complete it. And that is you, Lord. And in those days where we're struggling, and in those days that maybe our faith isn't quite what it would be, remind us, Lord, that you are faithful.